Alan, what are your look? My final thoughts are: I like that this film asks another question, but we can't replace old racism with new racism, because I see that people are, and you cannot deny this. If you say anything racist against a white person on social media, it's totally fine. If you see people say racist things like on any episode of Joy Reid's show on MSNBC, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. And I think both are wrong. Both the racism of old and the racism that's new, all bad. And this argument that black people can't be racist, I'm sorry, I've seen it. They can. I don't think I'm against racism in all their forms. Not a radical thing to say, but I also think it's not something I preach or need to talk about. I think it's stupid to even. I feel like the people that sort of preach it too loudly, there might be something going on with them. I just sort of live my life a way where, you know, I like to hang out with like-minded people, but it really their outer who they are, their identity is kind of irrelevant. I think if you make too much about your identity, I think it becomes a trap. And I think you allow yourself to be controlled by other people, especially when it comes to name calling. I think there's a more thoughtful conversation. Some of the best commentary I've seen about race, it's usually by people that are not accepted by mainstream. For example, Zuby. Does anyone know who Zuby is? I follow Zuby. Zuby follows me, oddly enough, on Twitter. And I think he has some of the most thoughtful takes on race. And he doesn't talk, he's not a guy that talks about race a lot. He does a podcast. I would describe him as a modern philosopher, and he's a rapper. I'm not super into his music, but I'm not super into any rap music. I'm just not. Okay, I'm sorry. It's not my jam. I like different stuff. Movie soundtracks is where my ears tend to gravitate. But, you know, I just want to be able to have this discussion out loud where all people are allowed to express their opinions. All people. Not like, shut up and listen. We're the ones talking. We flipped the caste system to this, and now you're at the bottom. And the mainstream media, all the mainstream news outlets have just accepted this. Social media tends to accept this. I do not accept this. I think we can all have adult, straight conversations. I think the only way to have real change is to be honest, not just to be honest, but be honest with yourself. And I feel that if you're a community that wants to change, outside forces are not going to change you. Programs to help you aren't going to change you. The only way to change you, you only have power to change yourself. And I almost think it's condescending. We have to help these people. Like the overreach of affirmative action and DEI, it's been an overreach. Started with good intentions. It's now been an overreach. We're deserving people. We need to get back to a meritocracy. That works. And what it does is it puts the bar here, and we want you to reach for that bar. Lowering standards is the worst possible thing we could do, and I think we are leaning to the wrong end of the bell curve. I'm going to get to your comments in a minute, but I want to hear what Alan has to say about what I just said.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I kind of take the Morgan Freeman attitude. Stop talking about it. You know, you want to change racism, you stop talking about it. You know, it's weird, but growing up in an all-white community all my life, through high school, I hate to say it, but white people are pretty good to me. You know, the ones who bullied me were assholes. They weren't racist. You know, and honestly, race to me was never an issue in my life until I got to college. And then I was paying people to tell me that racism is a big issue in life. And to say that, I would say this in terms of access to opportunities for me and for other minorities in America today, much better today than it was in the 80s when I was growing up. But the vitriol is much worse today than it was in the 80s. And that's my frustration. A lot of the comments are out there is basically saying, Ava DuVernay. I'm looking at John Harrison's comment here. Black privileged clown in Hollywood. It's weird, but I kind of find I've kind of followed her career in the sense of she's always, to me, felt like she walked two lines. One is I think she has a lot of good things to say about race, but at the same time, she's kind of, I felt like she kind of got sucked into the Hollywood system, to this woke Hollywood system that is forcing her and other people of color, other minority directors, writers, actors to toe a certain line. And I feel like it's that way. As we talked about a couple of years ago, I reviewed a movie called Justine about a woman who was trying to get her life back on track after her veteran husband died. He was Black. They have a half Black, half white child, and she's having a lot of problems. And I reviewed it. I gave it a really positive review because it was a very sweet movie. And the filmmaker took my review and took the movie, gave it to Ava DuVernay, and she got it on Netflix. And so there's, it's, I kind of like, I don't want to get to this point where I have to say that she's a horrible person or that she's the grifter, because why would she produce a movie like this? And what I also find amazing is that this movie is put out by Neon and not by any of the big studios. So it's one of these indie film outlets that is giving her this voice. I mean, this is the baffling thing is you watch this movie and you think to yourself, how is this from Ava DuVernay? Because it doesn't fit the message that we are hearing constantly. And that maybe there's something there. I'll grant it. The book Origins came out in 2020. So, maybe it's a come to Jesus moment. I don't know, but I think maybe from this audience, this movie would be more well received if her name wasn't attached to it. But the reality is, she did film this movie. She's the director. She shot it on film, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
That's not an easy task to, that tells you that there's intention in this story, and it's. At times I just get tired of having to research a filmmaker's life and to judge whether that this particular film that I saw on a screen that I need to taint it some way, good or bad, because of that person's past. Sometimes you just have to take the film for what it is, and that is what's thrown up on that screen, and that's my approach to this film.
Well,
so
look,
it's I'll just say it's definitely a movie you need to see. If you don't agree with it, you need to see this movie, because it will either strengthen or it will cause you to question your current beliefs, and maybe you need to alter it a bit, or maybe it'll strengthen it by saying this is where it clearly got it wrong. But that's what this discussion has to be, because the discussion is now one-sided. White people bad, everyone else good. And,
well, that's the thing. That's the thing that the only socially acceptable form of racism now is against white people.
Mm-hmm. The WGA letter is the perfect example of that.
It's socially acceptable. No racism whatsoever should be socially acceptable ever. And what really irks me is there have been for decades since the Civil War, good white people who have stood up and stood behind Black Americans, Black brothers and sisters, however you want to put it, and have stood up and said, no more, no. And now I feel like we're at a point where it would be really nice when you see a narrative that's out there that is very anti-white, that Black people need to now, we're at the point now where we have to have sober-minded Black voices stand up and say, you know what? This is very anti-white. How about we don't do this either? Until we get to that place, these problems will never go away. These problems will never go away. You can talk white supremacy till you're blue in the face. There may be a form of Black supremacy that I think is taken seed, and I think it is a dark place we're going down as a country if this is where we're going. So,
one thing that has been going on in my mind, especially as the Christian in the room, is this idea of forgiveness. And for years I've been thinking, why is it that the Black church just doesn't simply say, I forgive white people for slavery?
What I really wish.
Can you imagine what that would do? The talk that would have, and the ideas that would go in people's minds of forgiving and saying that was a long time ago and we need to move on with our lives. Well, go ahead.
Well, here's what I'll say. I wish we were unburdened by what has been.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know who said that? That's a quote
Pee Wee Herman
from a very famous. I wish we were unburdened from what has been. And I'm being serious. I feel like there's almost like a burden that comes with. I had a friend in college who happened to be Black, and he did not want to cast Black people in his movies. He said if he casts a Black person in like a short film or something he was making, it's like then he's sort of burdened to like having to deal. He wanted to cast white people because his whole thing was, well, white people are generic people. I can just tell a story instead of a story that's going to have these sort of like almost obligation to comment on race. I just want to tell a story of a person, not, tell a story about race. So,
and to be clear, you're talking about a Black director who said that.
I'm talking about a Black director who wanted to only cast white people. There you go. Make of that what you will. Bush and Ryu Cat for 5. Chris Allen, I'll replay the part about Dune Part 2 later, about filmmaking and wokeness. Maybe you should explain the meaning of woke to the uninitiated. Alan?
The explanation of woke, it's honestly, it's similar to political correctness. I think the what makes me call it woke is the lecturing nature of it. Right. where whatever thing you write, whatever television show you make, whatever movie you make, you have to preach and right. Talk down to people, right. As opposed to movies that used to empathize with people. Where you could put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist, feel their obstacle that they have to overcome, and then when they overcome it, you feel hope in yourself that you can overcome it as well. And that is gone. Now we have to be told how we are imperfect and how we are wrong in areas of race, in gender, in everything.
Let me just say this. Maybe Glenn, you want to clip this as a YouTube short. You will never change hearts and minds by making someone else wrong. You can only do that through empathy. And there is a terrible idea that has become popularized, and that is that I must look like the character in the movie that I'm seeing, or I must be exactly the same thing as the character I'm writing or drawing. Bad idea. The point of all fiction, comic books, movies, TV, video games, is to empathize with someone who does not look like you. The point of that is the entire point. You empathize with someone who doesn't look like you. You learn empathy, which is what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. Clip that.
Here, I'll piss off the audience with this. In the 80s, I was a very staunch evangelical Christian. And we're in the middle of the AIDS crisis at this point. So homosexuality was a sin. It was an abomination. AIDS was God's judgment upon the homosexuality community. What changed me was the fact that I started I had gay friends, and I started getting more gay friends. And you realize that when you have gay friends, when you talk to them, when you treat them as normal people, as your friend, you realize that certain things you've learned to believe about them are not true. And that, and I can go even further in terms of how I dealt with it from a Christian standpoint. But, the only way to get empathy is to broaden your sphere. In Origin, the first pillar of the caste system, the first way you create the caste system is to prevent cross-mixing. You prevent interracial marriages. Right. You prevent groups from crossing over through marriage. You stop that, and you've created the first foundation to create a caste system.